Welcome to Faith in 5, a weekly video devotional designed to discuss practical spiritual concepts in 5 minutes or less. I'm your host, Mark Vandella. So spring is here, and what that means for me is that I start planting my garden. Now I admit I am a novice gardener. I'm actually pretty terrible at it, but I have fun trying new things and learning. And I ask all of my friends, I'm sure that they're annoyed with me, the ones that are good at landscaping things. I always ask them so many questions. But one of the things for me that I love is a fresh tomato from the garden. And the hard part about my garden and the reality of loving fresh tomatoes from the garden is that I'm not good at growing tomatoes. I work really hard to plant 2 plants, and now again, when I say work really hard, I actually cheat a little bit. I buy one of the plants that already has a couple fruit on it, and then I'm thinking, oh man, I'm gonna get so many tomatoes. And we always plant both like nice big steak tomatoes and some cherry tomatoes. I've always had better luck with the cherry tomatoes. People tell me they're easier to grow, so clearly I have better luck because they're easier. But what ends up happening is you spend so much time investing in this plant, watering it and trimming it and making sure that it's staked and that no branches break off. And at the end of the summer for me with my tomato plants, I only get like 3 to 4 tomatoes on my plant. And it's so much work and it's so frustrating, and you want it to go the way that you full of tomatoes. But then this last year, it was kind of funny. It was almost like my garden was laughing at me. Because as I was about a month into my gardening process, and there was a ton of what looked like weeds. So I started pulling some of the weeds, and then I noticed, it's got a little yellow flower on it. It looks like a tomato plant. And sure enough, I took a picture of it, sent it to one of my landscaping friends. They're like, yeah, those are tomatoes. And so I had 8 different tomato plants, and my friend called them volunteers. And all I can think about is Katniss volunteering as tribute, right? So I have all these tribute plants who I didn't plant. It's almost like the ones that I spent time on and planted have no tomatoes on them. And the ones that I didn't, my garden was like, we could kind of do this better than you, right? And so we had just so many cherry tomatoes everywhere. And I tell you this because I think that our faith is very similar to gardening. Not only personally, but also what we do in this world and the way that our lives should impact the lives of others. In Mark 16, 15 through 16, Jesus says that God authorized and commanded me to commission you. And he says that we are to go out and tell everyone we meet, both near and far, and teach them in this way of life. And I like that, the way that it's phrased in the Message version, in this way of life. Because what that tells me is that it's a process, and that we're showing people and we're teaching people something that is ongoing. It's not a one-time thing where you hand out a piece of paper with a Bible verse on it, or it doesn't necessarily paint the picture of the street corner prophet. What it is that there's a way of life that should be interesting to people. Honestly, when people come to my house and they see my garden, even it's a terrible garden, when they see it, they always take interest. And they ask me, what do you have planted here? And what's that? And what are you looking to do? And how did you learn that? It's a way of life. And the way that we live out our faith should look very similar to the efforts we put into gardening. And I've been doing ministry for 15 plus years now. And I have had times with people that I care about deeply, and I've walked them through my life and introduced them to Jesus. And it doesn't necessarily yield exactly what I think it should, right? Sometimes I get 1 or 2 tomatoes and it was a lot of effort, but that's okay because God asked us to do that. And sometimes I'm not even working that hard, and all of a sudden I have a bunch of people saying, hey, by the way, I really am interested in that. They start raising their hands like tributes. And so as you consider your faith and what you can do, I love spring because it always challenges me to think through my faith. And what am I doing to cultivate ongoing relationships and introduce people to Jesus? So as you consider your faith this week, I want to challenge you to do 3 things. One is to invite people into this process. God asks us to do that. Invite people in to your life and what you're doing, your regular everyday life. Also, introduce people to Jesus, just like you would a friend. As you invite them into your life, introduce them to Jesus. Hey, this is my friend Jesus. Do you know about him? Let me tell you about him. Just like people take interest in my garden, your life should also reflect that. That people, when you invite them in and introduce them to Jesus, they should also take interest in what you're doing. Your life should look different than every other life that they've come in contact with, so that they show interest in what you're doing. So this week, as you live out your faith, consider those three things. One is to invite people. What are you going to do to invite them into your life, invite them into your faith journey? 2, introduce them to Jesus. Tell them about who Jesus is and that we have a relationally loving God who invited them into a relationship with Jesus. And then 3rd, help people be interested in what you're into. Jesus is interesting, so tell them about him.